The text was short. 2 lines. No emoji. No name. Meet me tonight or I'll tell. It came from my husband's number. I read it 5 times before my hand stopped shaking. I looked at the clock. 7:12 p.m. The house smelled like roasted broccoli and laundry. The kids were in the next room watching cartoons. Daniel's phone was on the counter where he left it after grabbing his keys and saying he had a late meeting. I clicked on the thread. No previous messages, no sign it had been sent to anyone else. My chest went cold because I have secrets. Everyone has secrets now and then. I had one. I'd been carrying like a loose tooth, a stupid, ugly mistake from 8 months before we got married. I had never told Daniel. I had planned to carry it forever. The message could mean he knew. It could mean he was ending me. It could mean something I had not even imagined. I froze, then grabbed my keys. I called Maya first. She's my oldest friend, and loud and honest and terrible at keeping drama to herself, which is why I trusted her. I told her every detail, leaving out the thing I was most ashamed of at first. She listened, then told me to breathe, to not go alone, and to record everything. I hung up and called my therapist, Dr. Lopez. She told me to name the fear out loud and to keep a factual list. She said, don't do anything impulsive, document, protect yourself. The thing about panic is that it makes you move. So I drove to the restaurant where Claire liked to sit by the big window, the place where she could watch traffic and feel like she was controlling chaos. Claire is my sister. We used to be close. Now we are a clenched jaw across holiday dinners and awkward small talk. Her marriage to Matt has been fine in an Instagram sort of way. Or so I told myself. She was waiting under an umbrella, hair a mess, face taut. She had Daniel's phone in her hand like a weapon. When I sat, she didn't look ashamed. She looked like someone who'd been holding a match to a dry house for months. She said, I tried to not do it. I tried to warn you. I tried to be the adult. But he wouldn't stop. He told me I'd ruin his marriage if I told. He promised to leave you if I said a word. So I used his phone to get you here. She slid the phone across the table. There were pictures. Screenshots of late-night texts. Photos of them in his truck with the glow of a gas station behind them. One was a selfie, her hair tangled around his face, both of them flushed like they'd been running. My whole world rewound and fell apart and then folded into a hot pressure point behind my eyes. I couldn't breathe because the secret I'd been hiding suddenly felt ridiculous and irrelevant. Claire said, I'm pregnant. Her voice was small, like she'd swallowed a fist. The words landed in me and shifted the landscape. She showed me a text he'd sent her 2 nights ago. Don't tell her. Just meet now. I can't do this anymore. He'd sent messages promising to leave me, to start over with her. Promises to break our family and stitch together a new one. Claire said he'd been saying it for months. He said he hated lying. He said he loved her. He said he'd handle the mess. I left the restaurant without saying much. I drove home like someone in a nightmare trying to memorize the layout of the room in case it became real when I woke up. When I walked in, Daniel was on the couch like he always was, scrolling through news. Shirt untucked. Utterly normal. My voice came out flat when I asked whose phone had been used to text me. He laughed a little, a nervous noise. He said Claire was unstable, that she'd been sending messages to herself to make drama. He said he had no idea what I was talking about. He said I was being paranoid. I had photos. I had screenshots. I had Claire's voice shaking when she said my name and said she was pregnant. I told him he'd better start telling things that matched the facts. He stood up slow. He put his hands on my shoulders. He said he hadn't slept in weeks. He said he loved me. He said I was hysterical. He told our neighbors to call and tell them Daniel had a perfect marriage, that I was upset, that I'd made a scene earlier at the store. He called his mother. She called me within an hour and asked if I was okay and if I was sure I wasn't reading too much into a joke. That was the first wave of abandonment. Not because they sided with him, but because they folded away from the mess. Because people find it easier to believe a man with a stable job and a tidy house than a woman clutching photos in a drive-thru. Maya suggested I go to Matt's house. If his son saw Claire was okay, maybe that would keep her from flipping back into weapon mode. I called Matt. He sounded tired, but he said he would come over. Daniel sat at the table and refused to look at me. He said Claire had a history of lying. When Matt arrived and Claire walked in behind him, everything accelerated. She said she felt trapped. She said she'd been trying to break it off, that she didn't want to be the kind of person who ruins things. She cried onto Matt's shoulder like a woman who had no plan and no map out of the hole she'd dug. Daniel's denial was immediate and sharp. He said Claire was using me. He said she was jealous because I had the kind of life she'd always wanted. He said I provoked her. He said you always did like to be dramatic. Those words were a knife through something soft in me. I tried to answer back with facts and photos and location logs Claire had printed. He laughed and said photos could be staged. He said screenshots could be fake. I felt the house tilt. I felt the floor drop. There was a moment after the argument where everything felt suspended. The kids were asleep. The street was quiet. I went to our bedroom and sat on the floor and let the air leave me. I called Dr. Lopez. I told her maybe I was the crazy one. She asked me to breathe. She suggested checking the backup on Daniel's phone, the kind of dry, practical thing that felt like a small lifeline. She told me to go to the phone company if I had to. I did. The carrier's office smelled like coffee and late fees. I asked for help, and the woman behind the counter looked at me like I was a problem from a messy fiction novel. But she checked the numbers log and printed out the last 6 months of outgoing messages and times. That printout was a sheet of paper that could be used in court. It had his number and timestamps and the same odd little typing errors that matched the screenshots Claire had shown me. I took the paper to Daniel, I pushed it across the table and said, "Your carrier confirms outgoing messages. The timestamps match the photos. You need to stop gaslighting me." He took the paper, he read it, he sat down. The denial left him like a costume taken off in a rush. He said the words I'd hoped not to hear. "I'm sorry." It was a small apology, and it sounded like a man trying to put out a house fire by opening the window and hoping the smoke goes away. He said he never meant for this to happen. He said it started when he was lonely at work. He said he made a stupid choice. He said Claire had been persistent and he'd been weak. He said Claire was pregnant. My knees went soft. It was the last thing I wanted and the only thing that made the whole web make sense. He apologized again. And for the first time, he looked like a man who believed in his apology the way someone believes in the weather. Then the chaos came. Word leaked. People we barely knew texted, then blog posts and passive-aggressive comments. My mother called and asked if I was all right, and then announced at dinner she thought I shouldn't be so quick to make accusations. Should I? My father said Daniel deserved compassion. My inbox filled with "hope you can work this out," notes that read to me like thinly veiled allegiances. Matt moved out, Claire moved in with her sister, Daniel moved into the guest room while we tried counseling. We sat under fluorescent lights and rolled out the phrase boundaries like bubble wrap. The kids watched and learned the tone of adults who are breaking. There was a tiny false victory when Daniel promised to go to therapy and to stop all contact with Claire. He agreed to put his phone on the table during dinner. He agreed to our rules. For a week, things were quiet. He was present at meals, home at bedtime. He was a model of contrition. I let myself believe that maybe we could rebuild. Then I found a receipt in the trash. A coffee shop receipt. Same town Claire had said she'd be in that week. Same afternoon, 2 names together. The proof looked petty on paper, a different kind of wound because it meant the trust I was rebuilding was being undermined. I confronted him with the receipt, and he swore it was a mistake, that he met a client, that he'd been forced into a conversation. He said he was being followed, that someone wanted to make him look bad, that I was being paranoid again. I learned something ugly in that moment. Apologies that come with conditions are not apologies. They are promises to stop for now. They are a pause button, not a reset. I made a decision I had avoided because it felt like admitting failure. I packed a bag for myself and one for the kids. I called my lawyer on a Sunday because everything else was noise. I didn't want to be the woman who left. I wanted to be the woman who saved her marriage. But I couldn't be the only adult holding the blueprint for what we were supposed to be. The climactic scene was not cinematic. It was quiet and legal. I filed for separation and temporary custody. I changed the locks. I told Daniel in my softest voice that I was done being the only honest person in a house of liars. He begged. He cried. He promised to go to rehab, to do whatever I wanted to feel safe. I let him talk because sometimes people need to be heard to finally mean what they say. In court, the judge looked at us and asked if we had children, and we both said yes, and the judge signed the temporary orders. The aftermath was practical. Bill splits, therapists, the kids' schedule on a shared calendar that glared at my phone like a reminder of all the life we had to manage. Claire had a baby that winter. She sent a photo once. I deleted it. The truth settled in like winter. It hurt and then it hardened. People picked sides, and so did I. My parents called less. Daniel's mother cried on the phone and then didn't visit much. We learned to speak in smaller truths. I learned to say no without apologizing. Months later, on a Tuesday, when the light in the kitchen looked honest, I cooked dinner and set out 2 plates. It was simple. Chicken, salad, a small cake for no reason. Daniel came in for a visit with the kids on his allocated night. He was calmer, more measured. He apologized again, not with promises, but with facts that he'd quit the job that had him gone all the time, that he was in therapy 3 times a week, that he'd been to a support group. He didn't ask to come back. He didn't beg. He put the kids in my lap and read to them like a man trying to map the contours of a life he wanted to build, slowly, beyond the ruin he'd caused. I listened. I let my daughter fall asleep against my chest and my son build towers of blocks across the table. I had a list of boundaries now. Visits recorded, phones left in bags, no private meetings with Claire, no lying, and the small, fierce rule I'd made for myself: never let my anger make me do something I'd regret. I'd be honest but not reckless. I'd protect my children and my sleep. One night, months after the text that began it all, I found myself at the window with a cup of tea, watching the neighbor's dog chase nothing. The house was quieter. There was still pain, like the phantom of a broken bone, but there was also the gentle traffic of days. I thought about the phone on the counter and how such a small device could be used to cut across decades of intimacy and trust. I thought about Claire holding a new life she'd made in the middle of a storm. I thought about Daniel finally naming his weaknesses aloud. I thought about myself sitting up straight for the first time in a long time. I didn't have the tidy ending of revenge or the perfect marriage put back together. What I had was messy and honest and mine. I had boundaries. I had the kids. I had a therapist who texted me reminders to breathe. I had friends who would call if I started to wobble. The last line in my journal that night was small and sharp. I will teach my children that truth is heavier than comfort and that home is where honesty lives, even if it takes years to rebuild the walls.